the recording. And then in case of question, you can write it, your question in the chat. And at the end of each speech, we can consider all the question and to ask to the speaker. Okay. And so for today, we have two people from LATAT, Ruben Alvarez, David Borreco, and Ruben will start. And so the floor is yours. Good lesson, we can say, good webinar to everyone.
Okay, thank you, Federico, for introduction. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself because I have not been involved in the ASINA project so far. So my name is Ruben Alvarez. I work as senior researcher in LATAT in the same department as David Borreco, who was involved in the project since the beginning, more or less. Yeah, my background is in chemical engineering, but most of my professional career was in the field of the regulatory affairs, especially in the field of REACH regulation, CLP, and biocidal products regulation. Today, together with my colleague David Borreco, we will be carrying out this webinar regarding toxicological aspects of nanomaterials according to REACH regulation. And at the end of the session, we will have one part which will be handled by David regarding one of a specific tool to handle risk assessment for nanomaterials, which is the Guide Nano. Next slide, David, please. So we have organized this webinar in 4 main topics. At the beginning of the session, we'll talk about general regulatory aspects, so mainly focus on which is the definition of nanomaterial according to the European Commission, and the definition of nanoform, which is a specific definition within the framework of REACH regulation. Afterwards, we will talk generally about REACH regulation itself, and we will focus about the requirements related to nanomaterials, which were updated in 2018 in this regulation. And in the third part of the session, we will talk about other implications or requirements applicable to other regulations, such as the biocidal product regulation, regulation related to food, to cosmetics, to medical devices, or even though for working protection. And at the end of the session, my colleague David, we will talk about the Guide Nano tool, which will be used within the ASINA project to perform the risk assessment of the different cases of study. So if we move now to the first section of the webinar regarding general regulatory aspects. So nanomaterials are considered as materials itself containing substances, so the same regulations that apply to substances also apply to nanomaterials. So regulations such as REACH regulation or CLP regulation will apply to this kind of materials itself. In that sense, the European Commission has issued a recommendation definition a recommendation to define the term nanomaterials, and in the different sector-specific legislation, they have adapted this definition in order to fit better in every specific sector. So at the beginning, when most of these regulations were issued, this definition was not included. But in the new EU regulations, specifically address this kind of materials, such as the novel food regulation, the food information for consumers regulation, the cosmetic regulation, the biocidal, medical devices, medicinal products, plant protection products, and so on. So if we move to the next slide, we will see that in 2011, the European Commission issued first definition of nanomaterial, which is what is mentioned in this square box. So basically, a nanomaterial was defined as a natural, incidental, or manufactured material containing particles, either in unbound state or as an aggregate or an agglomerate, where one or more external dimensions are in the size range of 1 nanometer to 100 nanometer for a simple majority at least of these particles considering the number size distribution. As this is a big definition, a global definition, and some specific materials were not included, they additionally added explicitly added some kind of material like fluorines, graphene flakes, and single-wall carbon nanotubes to be also included in this definition, especially when they don't fulfill the general rule of the external dimension. So they accept for this kind of materials that they could have one or more external dimensions below 1 nanometer. Additionally, when technically feasible, another property from the nanomaterial should be considered in the definition, such as the specific surface area by volume. And in this definition, they consider that in order to a nanomaterial fit within this definition, the specific surface area by volume should be greater than 60 square meters per cubic centimeter. So as you can see in this definition, we have a comprehensive definition, which includes all particulate materials. It could be used broadly in different regulatory fields. It only addresses nanomaterials from the point of view of the size itself, nothing related to the hazard or the risk intended itself. As the title of this slide mentioned, it's a recommendation, so it's not legally binding so far. And other aspects besides the main external dimension, the median value, and the specific surface area by volume are addressed in this definition. So in this slide, so we have different frameworks that the different European Union bodies addresses, where nanomaterials are included. So for instance, in the REACH regulation, the definition of nanomaterial itself is not included, but they define a concept called nanoforms, which I will show you in the next slide how it's defined. And in the different regulatory frameworks, they address the definition of nanomaterials. If nanomaterials are included in an approval procedure, they are marked with a tick in the third column. The safety assessment of nanomaterials are addressed in most of the regulatory frameworks we have here. In terms of labeling the biocidal products, the cosmetic products, and all the frameworks related to food have specific requirements regarding nanomaterials itself. So in case of novel food and food additive framework, they are marked with a star because it's related to the food information provisions. So the regulation 1169 from 2011, which is listed below. So that's why and apart from that, several guidance exist to address the fulfilling of requirements related to nanomaterials for the REACH regulation, the cosmetic products, and novel food and food additives regulations. So if we focus right now in the REACH regulation, we will, with the amendment that took place in 2018, we will have a definition of the term nanoform, which is shown in the next slide. So basically, within this amendment of the REACH regulation, which is listed in the regulation of the European Union 2018/1881, a nanoform is defined as a form of a natural or manufactured substance. We are not talking about materials anymore here. We are talking about substance containing particles, either in an unbound state or aggregate or as an aggregate, where one or more external dimensions are in the size of 1 to 100 nanometers for at least a simple majority of the particles in the number size distribution. The derivation of fluorines, graphene flakes, and single-wall carbon nanotubes is also included in this definition. So the main differences, as stated below, regarding the definition of nanoform and the definition of nanomaterial is in the case of nanoform. And we are not talking anymore about materials, we're talking about substances. The incidental substances are not considered in this definition, only natural and manufactured substances. There is no flexibility about this 50% threshold. Sorry, I'm seeing this. The specific surface area by volume criterion is not considered in the definition of nanoform. Since it is included in an amendment of the REACH regulation, it's legally binding, while in the other case, it was only a recommendation. And as you can see, regarding the external dimensions, we are talking about the same size range as it was considered in the nanomaterials. Apart from that, we will see later on that regarding nanoforms, we will have some provisions within the REACH regulations, such as the size distribution, the aspect ratio shape, the surface functionalization of the surface area, which needs to be provided when you register a substance, including the nanoforms part in the REACH registration dossier. So after issuing the nanomaterial definition in 2011, most of the organizations, stakeholders, industry using nanomaterials were not conformed with that definition because they consider that they don't englobe all the possible nanomaterials which we are using. And after several discussions, in June of last year, 2022, a new definition of nanomaterials was issued by the Commission. Again, it was a recommendation of definition, not legally binding. And here we have marked in red and in green color the main changes or aspects which contain the new definition of nanomaterials. So with the new definition of nanomaterials, we continue to consider materials which are natural, incidental, and manufactured. And right now, we specify the solid state of these particles to be considered as nanomaterials. Apart from that, we continue to consider that several conditions must be fulfilled, at least for a simple majority of particles in the number-based size distribution. But in this case, we have three conditions. The first one is the same one as we had in the previous definition from 2011. So one or more external dimensions of the particles are in the size of 1 to 100 nanometers. Two new conditions were issued in order not to add some derivations in the definition as it was before. So right now, for these nanomaterials with an elongated shape, in order to be considered a nanomaterial, two external divisions should be smaller than 1 nanometer, and the other dimension should be larger than 100 nanometers. And in case of plate-like shaped nanomaterials, one external dimension should be smaller than 1 nanometer, and the other two should be larger than 100 nanometers. Apart from these conditions, they establish an upper limit regarding the size of the different dimensions. So the upper limit will be 100 micrometers in this definition. And in the case of being feasible to estimate the specific surface area by volume, now instead of considering using this property to define a nanomaterial, we will use this as an exclusion criteria. And in case this property is lower than 6 square meters per cubic centimeter, the material won't be considered as a nanomaterial. So in the following two slides, we will see the comparison among these two, as I have already stated. So the origin and the objects are exactly the same in both definitions. And right now, regarding the state of the matter in the new definition, we have a solid materials, solid particles, while in 2011 it was not specified, despite in the frequently asked questions, it was stated that they should be considered as solid materials. Then the size has been extended in the new definition, including the sizes of the elongated shapes and the applied lake shapes nanomaterials. In the new definition, no explicit inclusions are listed, while in the old one, full-length graphene flakes and single-wall carbon nanotubes were included. And next slide. Yeah, and here we have the criteria considerations regarding the limits of the upper size limits. So right now we have one limit stated in 100 micrometers. Then the consideration regarding the specific surface area by volume, that earlier in 2011 it was a criteria to identify nanomaterials, and now it's a criteria for exclusion. And regarding the flexibility of the threshold, right now there is no flexibility, while in the definition of 2011 there was a possibility to have nanomaterials with lower threshold of 1 to 50%. So now that we have in mind this definition, we will move to the REACH regulation. Before entering into the requirements related to nanomaterials, I want to remind you the main parts of the REACH regulation. It's talking generally speaking. So the REACH regulation, which number is 1907 from 2006, is a legislative act which aims to protect the human beings and environment about the risks related to substances. It's a legislative act that came into force in June of 2007 and regulates this protection against the risk of substances through different titles, mainly containing titles related to registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. It's a European Union regulation that applies only to the European Economical Area. So that means it applies to the member states of the European Union plus Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland. So the main goals of the regulation, as you should know, are listed here. So on one side, the first goal is to guarantee a high level of protection of the new human health and environment by evaluating the hazard of the substances, which addresses this regulation, the hazard, the exposure, and the risk assessment of these substances. A second goal to be achieved is guarantee a free circulation of substances on the market. In order to achieve this goal, REACH registration dossier must be submitted. And in order to submit this dossier, you need data from the hazardousness of the and the toxicological and ecotoxicological data in order to manipulate and make a safe use of these chemicals. Another goal is to promote alternative testing methods that imply the reduction of animal testing. So far, depending on the tonnage ban, the REACH registration dossier, we will be required to provide information of toxicological and ecotoxicological data where you will need to do animal testing, but this regulation promotes the development of new alternative testing methods where animal testing is not involved. And apart from that, another goal to be achieved is the promotion of competitiveness and innovation among the chemical industry. So right now I will go through the different aspects of the REACH regulation. The REACH acronym includes the registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. The first part, main part of this section will be related to the registration part. So without considering nanomaterials or considering all kind of chemical substances, the first part to be considered in terms of registration is that companies should collect information about the property and the uses of these substances that they manufacture or import in quantities above 1 ton per year. Additionally, depending on the tonnage ban, it will be required an additional chemical safety assessment of this substance in order to have a safe use of them. When this information is collected in order to be able to commercialize this substance within the European Union territory, a registration dossier must be submitted to the ECHA, which is the European Chemical Agency, and this agency is in charge of handling everything related to this regulation. You need also to keep in mind that this regulation only applies to substances, either on their own, in a form of a mixture or as part of articles, but this regulation also states that some kind of substances are exempted from this title, such as the radioactive substance, waste, or substances which are regulated by other regulation sites, medicines, food and feed, cosmetic, biocides, plant protection products, etc. Another point to keep in mind regarding the REACH regulation, the part of registration, is that one of the principles is that we need to have one registration per substance. This is the main principle on that, and the ECHA encouraged to all manufacturing importers of these substances to present a joint registration dossier. Once the dossier is ready for registration, before being able to commercialize a substance, you need to pay a tax to the ECHA, and the prices of the different taxes, depending on the tonnage ban, are stated in the Regulation 340 from 2008. As mentioned before, in 2018, there was an amendment on the REACH regulation in order to include specific requirements related to nanomaterials. One of the issues that they included in this amendment was the definition of nanoforms, as I stated before in this webinar. But apart from that, they updated different sections as well of this regulation. From now on, I will go through the different aspects where requirements related to nanomaterials are stated within the regulation. So from one of the aspects is related to the chemical safety reports, which needs to be provided in the registration dossier when you want to cover a dossier for a tonnage ban higher than 10 tons per year. And here, within the chemical safety report, you have a section related to the hazard assessment, another section related to the exposure assessment, and the final part related to the risk characterization ratios. In the part of the exposure assessment, it was updated, the regulation, in the form that when nanoforms are covered by the registration, a characterization of dissolution rate, particle aggregation, agglomeration, and the particle surface chemical changes should be included within this dossier as well. Before this amendment, this was not mandatory to be included, and now they made it mandatory. Then another aspect which was updated was related to the information to be provided in the technical dossier, the technical part of the registration dossier. So as stated in Article 12 of this regulation, some information regarding physicochemical properties, toxicological information, and ecotoxicological information should be provided depending on the tonnage ban. For the lowest tonnage ban, which is the one affected by this Annex 3, the tonnage ban between 1 and 10 tons, if these conditions listed in this slide are fulfilled, you need to provide all the information stated in the Annex 7. So if the substance is considered to be carcinogenic, mutagenic, or toxic for reproduction, or persistent, bioaccumulative of toxin, or very persistent, or very cumulative, you need to provide the information in Annex 7. Apart from that, if the substance is considered, if we have a substance with dispersive or diffuse uses, or they meet other hazardous categories according to CLP, they need also to fulfill that. But what I wanted to mark here is the part of nanoforms. If your dossier covers substance with nanoforms, all the information must be stated unless these nanoforms are soluble in biological and environmental media. In that exception, you will be only obliged to provide physicochemical properties, nothing related to toxicological and ecotoxicological studies. Next. So another aspect which was another annex which was updated with this amendment was the annexes, which states the main criteria in order to provide information in the technical report included in the registration dossier. So the main points which were changed in this annex includes that the part of that the requirements specific to nanoforms apply without prejudice to other requirements applicable to other forms of the substance. When nanoforms are included in the registration dossier, adequate justification must be provided in specific categories for assessing them. And another thing is that you have the possibility to group nanoforms in what is called a set of similar nanoforms when you are able to confirm that the hazard assessment, the exposure assessment and the risk assessment of this set of similar nanoforms under certain circumstances could be carried out jointly. In order to establish a set of similar nanoforms, they must be within certain limits established in the Annex 6, which are listed in the next slide. Exactly to characterize this set of similar nanoforms, you need to establish certain physicochemical properties for identification, such as the composition, the name or the identifiers, the number-based particle size distribution with the indication of the number of fraction of constituent particles in the size range between 1 and 100 nanometers, a description of the surface functionalization or treatment, and identification of each agent, including the CAS number or the EC number of this treatment, the shape, aspect ratio, and other morphological characterization, the surface area, so that it could be the specific surface area by volume, by mass, or both, and a description of the analytical methods used to describe the previous properties itself. Then, as I mentioned before, in order to submit a registration dossier, you need to provide physicochemical properties data, toxicological data, and ecotoxicological data. Depending on the tonnage band which we want to cover with the registration dossier, the amount of studies or information to be provided in the dossier will vary. So here we have the example of the information that needs to be provided in terms of physicochemical properties, depending on the tonnage band. The Annex 7, 8, 9, and 10 are the annexes stating which information needs to be provided. So in the lowest tonnage band, from 1 to 100 tonnage band, a list of 14 physicochemical properties needs to be provided. When we achieve the tonnage band of 100 tons per year to be commercialized or imported from outside the EU, 3 additional physicochemical properties needs to be provided. So if we go to the specificities to the nanomaterials, we will figure out that if you move to the next slide a bit, only for 4 specific properties, specificities to nanomaterials are listed. So in terms of water solubility and partition coefficient and octanol water, when you are estimating these properties, the potential confounding effect of dispersion should be also assessed. In addition, from the water solubility for nanoforms, the testing of the dissolution rate in water as well in the relevant biological and environmental materials should be also considered. And here also for nanomaterials, for the lowest tonnage band included in the Annex 7, apart of the granulometry of the substance, we need to consider as well the dustiness. But in case the exposure to granular form of the substance during the life cycle can be excluded, there's no need to perform this study. Once we achieve the tonnage band of 10 tons per year, the agency may ask for other information in terms of physicochemical properties if there is an indication that the specific additional particle properties significantly influence the hazard of or the exposure to those nanoforms. When we move to the part of the toxicological studies, we face the same situation as before. For the lowest tonnage band, we will require to provide only 5 studies. And as long as we increase the tonnage band to be covered, the number of studies and then the type of studies will increase. So in the previous stages, we will only consider in vitro studies, and as long as the tonnage band increases, we will have also to include in vivo studies and longer studies, subchronic studies for 90 days or long-term toxicity studies for more than 1 year. If we focus on the different studies itself, and what is stated in the different annexes are listed in the following slides. So, in terms of in vitro gene mutation study in bacteria, this could be waived if the study is not appropriate in this kind of elements, so in bacteria. And the annex also states that if it's not appropriate, we need to consider to carry out the studies in mammalian cells. In terms of acute toxicity, the only route considered for a tonnage band between 1 and 10 tons is the oral route, but in case of nanoforms, this route of exposure could be replaced by studies by inhalation, unless the inhalation route is unlikely to happen for this substance. Even though when you have taken into consideration exposure to aerosols, particles, or droplets in a negligible size. Once we increase the tonnage band to the range between 10 and 100 tons per year, in terms of acute toxicity, part of the oral route or the inhalation route, we need to consider a second route and provide information about this hazard category for this second route. Only this second route could be waived to provide information if you have a justification of this term, about the fact that there is no second route of exposure for the substance. Another study which is required is a short-term repeated dose toxicity studies for 28 days, but in case of nanoforms, the toxic kinetics should be considered, including the recovery period and were relevant the Lang's chlorines in this case. So, yeah, and as mentioned, it goes together with the other study of toxic kinetics here. Then when we achieve the tonnage band between 100 and 1,000 tons per year to be commercialized or imported from HDO into the EU. It's also required information for subchronic toxicity for 90 days. And as it happened for the short-term toxicity assay, for nanoforms, toxic kinetics should be also considered, including the recovery period and for the relevant lung clearance. And then if we move to the next slide, it will cover the highest tonnage band. So when you want to commercialize substances in quantities above 1,000 tons per year, then here it's required to perform a long-term repeated toxicity study in function of the results already obtained for the short-term and the subchronic repeated toxicity studies. And in case nanoforms are covered by the registration, other physical-chemical characteristics such as the particle size, the shape, and other morphological parameters should be taken into consideration in order to perform this study. Finally, if we move to the next slide, we will cover the part of the ecotoxicological studies. So as it happened with the toxicological studies and the physical-chemical, the number of information related to this topic increases as long as the tonnage band increases as well. So if we move to the next slide, we will see the main specificities here. Most of the time, when you check the consideration related to the specific properties related to toxicological studies, the main information related the possibility to waive and not to perform certain study. So if we focus, for example, in the short-term toxicity testing on invertebrates, there are some conditions that allows the submitter of the registration dossier to waive this study, but such, for example, the highly insolubility in water, but in case of nanoforms, the study cannot be skipped on the basis only of this property. And in addition to that, for substances which are poorly water soluble, substances which also consider nanoforms which have a low dissolution rate, the possibility to perform a long-term aquatic toxicity study should be considered at this stage. So in case of growth inhibition study aquatic plants, we have the same situation as before, that the study cannot be waived only based on the high solubility in water alone. In case of the short-term toxicity testing of fishing, we have a similar case as the short-term toxicity testing in invertebrates, so the study cannot be waived based only on the insolubility in water, and a long-term aquatic toxicity study in fish should be considered for nanoforms that have low dissolution rate. Next, David. As well, for the activity/respiration inhibition testing and the hydrolysis as function of pH, these two studies cannot be waived based only on the high insolubility in water alone for nanoforms. And in case of degradation, for those nanoforms which are not soluble or nor have high dissolution rate, should be considered to perform tests such as the morphological transformation, the chemical transformation, and other abiotic degradation. Finally, if we move, okay. Other properties which are considered here are the absorption and desorption screening and the bioaccumulation in aquatic species, preferably that if you want to skip to use that based on any specific physical-chemical property of the nanoform, you need to justify adequately the waiving of this test, justifying its relevance to low potential of absorption or the low potential of bioaccumulation. In case of tonnage bind from between 100 and 1,000 tons, the agency could ask for further information regarding absorption and desorption, but the reason of webinar study, if the reason of webinar study for nanoforms is any physical chemical property, adequate justification should be provided, especially related to its relevance to low potential for absorption. And finally, we have for the highest tonnage band, they also ask effect on terrestrial organisms. And here it is stated in Annex 9 that in absence of soil organism data of toxicity data for soil organisms, the equilibrium partitioning method should be applied. And when it is applied for nanoforms, it must be scientifically justified. Okay, so I will go fast for the last slides. So apart from the registration title, we have other titles applicable on the REACH. So we have, for instance, the evaluation title, which on one side, the ECHA evaluates registration dossiers in order to figure out that all the information required according to Annex 7, 8, 9, or 10 are covered. And in case any information is missing, they will ask the submitter to provide additional information. Another issue that they address through this title is the evaluation of hazardousness of substances. So when a property of concern has been identified for a certain substance, the different groups within ECHA have to decide which is the best way to address this concern. It could be either by other legislative titles, or it could be by establishing a harmonized classification according to CLP, or asking for an authorization in order to use this substance. So without a permit, you won't be able to use this substance of concern, or it will be restricted for certain uses. And if the conditions are granted for the uses stated in Annex 17, you cannot use that because it is considered that these substances have an unacceptable risk for the human health and environment, and therefore they need to be prohibited. In terms of nanomaterials, several actions have been performed already for the evaluation of re-registration dossiers containing nanoforms, which are listed in the next slide. Exactly. So we have the ECHA have implemented compliance checks of the dossiers for these 4 substances, including nanomaterials, and for 7 different substances, they have implemented actions in order to evaluate several concerns, are listed in the next 2 slides. So the evaluations for the synthetic amorphous silica and the silver nano have been already finalized. They have ongoing activity related to zinc oxide, to graphite and multi-wall carbon nanotubes. And if you change to the next slide, titanium dioxide, they will start activities next year regarding carbon black. And regarding cerium dioxide, they consider to start, but they have decided to withdraw their activities regarding to the information they found. Just to finalize my part of this webinar, I will state several requirements applicable to nanomaterials in our regulations apart from REACH regulation. So, for example, when we are talking about biosoluble products, the regulation 528 from 2012 is the one addressing the putting in the market this kind of products, and for that they establish a series of requirements to be fulfilled. When we are including in this kind of product nanomaterials, the nanomaterials definition based on the EC recommendation from 2022 is the one that is used. And the provision of this definition applies both for active and non-active substances. In order to put a biocidal product, first you need to include the active substance in the Article 95 list, so which is a list of approved active substances. Right now, only 3 substances covering nanoforms are included in that list. So if you want to use another substance including nanoforms, which is not listed in the list, you will need to ask for approval itself. The substances are the silicon dioxide, the silver absorbing silicon dioxide, and the synthetic amorphous silicon dioxide, either used as insecticides for, as stated, as product type 18, or used as preservative, as stated as product type 9 here. Apart from that, a dedicated risk assessment must be performed, including both the active substances and non-active substances, even though they are nanomaterials or not. If nanomaterials are included in the product, in the labeling must be stated which is the name of that nanomaterial, together with the word nano in brackets. And apart from the approval of the active substances, you need an authorization to put the biocidal product in the market, and there are different procedures, but including a simplified one, but the simplified one cannot be applicable in case nanomaterials are included in the biocides products. Then well, I forgot to mention before in the biocidal product that this regulation is handled by ECHA as well as REACH regulation. In case of food applications, it is not ECHA, it's the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, who is handling this. And specific requirements are listed in different regulations applicable to food applications, such as the novel food regulation, nanomaterials as food additives, the labeling of food containing engineered nanomaterials. So in that case, for example, in the label of the food that you acquire, it must be mentioned the name of the nanomaterials together with the word nano in brackets. And then also the nanomaterials in plastic for food contact materials and nanomaterials in active and intelligent food contact materials contain different requirements in these regulations. Another sector of applicability is the cosmetics one. If I'm not mistaken, this is one of the sectors for one of the case studies. So if you want to put a cosmetic in the market, first of all, the manufacturer of this cosmetic or the entity which is putting the cosmetic within the European Union must to perform a notification through the cosmetic product notification portal before placing that in the market. And in this portal, it contains explicit sections addressing nanomaterials. So in case of including nanomaterials in a cosmetic product, you need to provide through this notification the following information: an identification of the nanomaterial, a specification of the nanomaterial, including the particle size and its physicochemical properties, an estimation of the quantity of the nanomaterial contained in the cosmetic product, a toxicological profile of the nanomaterial, safety data related to the nanomaterial, and info related to reasonable foreseeable exposure conditions. As it happened in other sectors, when you label this kind of products, in the labeling should appear all the ingredients included in the cosmetic. And in case of nanomaterials, you need to state the name of the nanomaterial followed by the word nano in brackets. In case of the medical devices, the regulation of 2020 is like 561 is the one addressing medical devices. In order to put a medical device in the market, you need CE marking certification, which is evaluated by the notified bodies together with the national competent authorities on that matter. Only the European Medicines Agency is consulted when medicinal products are included or combined with these medical devices, and the notified bodies are the ones issuing the certification of CE marking and then allowing you to put this kind of products in the market. Regarding nanomaterials used in medical devices, we need to pay attention when we include nanomaterials in the phase of design and manufacture of medical devices, paying special attention if it exists the possibility of release of these nanomaterials inside the user body. And the different medical devices are classified in different categories from 1 to 3. And in case of including nanomaterials, the medical device will belong to the category 3 in case there is a high or medium potential internal exposure. And then to finalize my section of this webinar, I want to state that there are several regulations addressing the worker protection legislation of exposure to nanomaterials, such as the Occupational Health and Safety Framework, the Chemical Agents Directive, the Carcinogenic, Mutagenic, and Toxin for Reproduction Directive, together to the REACH and the CLP regulation. And basically what we need to check is that we have under control any potential risk related to chemicals, including to nanomaterials at work, by establishing some mitigation measures or reducing as maximum as possible the potential exposure. Now I give the floor to my colleague David in order to explain how the Guide Nano tool works, which is one risk assessment tool used especially addressed to nanomaterials. So David, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. So first of all, let me present myself. My name is David Burreco, and I'm working in the DAT with Ruben. And I'm involved also in ASINA project, working mainly studying the release of the different nano-label products derived from the project. Today I'm going to present a nano risk assessment tool, which is Guide Nano. And in Guide Nano, I'm going to present a case study that we are building. And in most of the explanations that Ruben did are integrated in the tool internally to make the calculations and have the final risk assessment with the tool. Okay, so let me present first the case study we are building, which is the activity of washing some fabric, which contains this fabric, a coating of silver heck. This silver heck is used for antibacterial applications. So first of all, what we need to implement on the tool is the definition of the materials and nanomaterials. We need to define which are the materials that are going to be involved along the life cycle stages. And for example, the different materials that we can implement into this tool are shown in the bottom of this screenshot. Let me change to the red dot. Okay. So here in this drop-down list, we can see what we can implement into Guide Nano and consider material or nanomaterial. We can implement articles, substances, and mixtures, nano objects, and then nanostructured aggregates or agglomerates. So let's take as an example the silver heck solution in this case. And let's see which are the different properties that we can implement into the Guide Nano tool. For example, first we need to do identification and short explanation of what's the silver heck. And after that, we can change parameters such as shape, size, and size. Also, the physical properties of the silver heck, surface properties, the function, mass conversion, and then chemical information and reactivity information, and classification and labeling, toxicity studies, and quality. I'm going to go through some of these parameters. And for example, here you can see the screenshot of the tool when I'm in the shape and size section in this case. And it's prepared to implement experimental data based on the characterizations that we can do in the project. And we can implement it here and consider it then for the next steps of the tool that it's asking. Then about the physical properties, this is what it's considered here in Guide Nano. In this case, because it's a nano silver, we selected the nanoscale particles, which were in this range of nanometers based on the characterizations that we did and we could observe by TEM and SCM. Then what we can also implement is the surface properties, where here we have silver and hydroxyethyl cellulose, the HEC, and the HEC is embedding the silver. So in this case, we consider as a coating, and the tool it's implementing it in this way. So these are some of the parameters that we can also take into account to define the surface properties of this silver HEC, which is the zeta potential, solubility, or hydrophobicity. Then if we move through the functions, these are the different functions that we can take into account. As I said here, because the case study that we are building, it's considering antibacterial textiles. We selected this antimicrobial agent that we consider the silver HEC. Then we can step to the chemical information. Here it's where we have to define which is the ratio of the silver and the HEC, and this then will have an effect on the risk assessment and the different values that we will see in the further slides. But if we move to the constituents that we can define also in this chemical information, as I said, the main two constituents are the silver and the hydroxyl cellulose. We can also implement some data separately for the silver and the HEC. And mainly what it's asking the tool to do the proper risk assessment is the physical properties and reactivity information. There is always a quality, let's say, section where it's specific to let the user know, in this case, if the amount of information that it's implementing into the tool is enough or not to do the proper risk assessment. In this case, as you can see here, because we fill in all the necessary information for the silver, the quality that it's giving the tool in this case, it's 100%, so we can consider we have all the necessary information to do the proper risk assessment with the silver HEC. Now, once we have defined the different materials and non-materials that are going to be present in our case study, we need to define which is the activity that it's going to be performed in our case study. As I said, here we are considering the washing of the textile. So first of all, we need to define which is our input to this activity and also the output of this activity. Parallelly, also, we have to define the release derived from this activity. And for example, if we go to the screenshot, in this case, our input of the washing textile, we said it was the initial textile. We define a material called initial textile in this case with the silver heck sprite on the surface of the textile. We are considering to have a realistic scenario, a large amount of pieces of textile. That's why here we consider a scenario where we are having into account 30,000 pieces of textile items in this case. Also, we define the output, which is the washed textile, and also the rivet release coming from this activity performed, which is the released silver heck with possible modifications that we can observe experimentally. Once we have defined this activity, also we have to go to the duration of this activity, and in this case, the washing. It's a washing of 30 minutes. We consider it's a realistic scenario, and here it's also good to implement it into the tool, and the tool itself, it's taking into account this and have a specific section to consider this information. Also, we have to link the activity that we want to assess, in this case, the washing textile, with the next activity in case we have some different activities which are linked between them. As you can see in the screenshot, first of all, we consider the washing, and then we link it with a possible unfilling of the washed textile. I'm not going through this case study with this scenario. I'm just focusing on the washing of the textile, but it's also good to know that it's possible to link this. And also, it's taking into account the link of the release into the next environmental compartment that I'm going to explain right now. In this case, we consider the release after the washing of the textile is going through the sewage network of a big city. In this case, Zaragoza, we consider. So let's talk about these compartments, which is another big amount of information that we have to implement into Get Nano. We have to consider the different environmental compartments that we foresee this release is going to go through. It's in this case not only considering the different environmental compartments, also the derived sediments or slashes coming from the different compartments. As you can see, as an example here, we consider that a realistic scenario after the washing of the textile, it's, as I said, going through the sewage network, and that is connected then to the wastewater treatment plant of that city. In this case, that city has different wastewater treatment plants. We consider the big one and the most reported in the literature. After this wastewater treatment plant, it's going through the river. In this case, we consider the Ebro River, which is also considered in the environmental essays and different models, environmental models that are used also in ASINA. And after the river is going directly to the Mediterranean Sea, where we consider the sediments from the Mediterranean Sea. So if we go specifically to one of these environmental compartments, for example, the wastewater treatment plant, we can see which are the different informations that it's asking the tool to have the proper risk assessment. Once we click in the environmental compartment, we have these different let's say parameters that we can define in each specific zone. Let's say that the zone is the different zones is what makes the environmental compartment. So because here it was the wastewater treatment plant, we identified based on the literature the different zones into this wastewater treatment plant. And into these different zones, we can implement information specifically on each one based on the properties, the composition, which are the contact zones between them, the emissions, the processes, the kinetics and exposure agents, and how this the possible exposure scenarios that could be derived from this environmental compartment. Let's go through some of them. For example, the emissions here, we consider one of the emissions that we have here in this specific environmental compartment is the release of the silver heck, and based on the number of washings that we take into account and we select in this case, we have this amount per cycle that it's finally derived and finally reaching this zone, and the rate. Then we have, as I said, for example, the exposed, which is the user selects a new exposed human population or ecospecies that will be described in the exposure frame. Some of the information that we implement here in the tool is also useful and automatically filled in other compartments or tabs in this case, let's say. For example, composition, emission, processes, chemical speciation, kinetics, and exposure agents are automatically filled according to the information that we have implemented into the tool. There are like internal links between the data that we are implementing in each case, and automatically it's filled. Then another big amount of information that we have to implement here in the GAIA tool, in this risk assessment tool, is the different exposure scenarios that we have. As a reminder, here we have a textile. So here the most realistic exposure scenarios that we foreseen is the direct contact with the skin. So that's why here we are only considering direct contact, and we implement it in the tool. We have both, but here we only go through the direct contact, which is a dermal contact, and we link it with the release derived from this textile that we defined before in the previous compartments. Then if we go specifically to this definition of the type of direct contact, because we have to also define how it's produced, this direct contact, we have this other drop-down list where we define that it's a worker which is wearing the textile, and the duration of this contact will be the 8 hours that the worker is working. And into this drop-down also we can implement the concentration estimates based on experimental data that we consider here during this time that it's the worker exposed to the textile. Then we have the hazard endpoints. These are the different hazard endpoints that the GAIA is considering. Some of them are under improvement. So it's a tool that it's constantly under improvement. Sorry. And as an example, one of these hazard endpoints is the acute toxicity, which we define first a safety limit value based on the literature, and in this paper it was considering a closed scenario using silver. So we consider this critical dose, and this critical dose is then compared with the concentration estimate that I explained before in the previous slide, and we have this risk coefficient ratio that it's calculated into the tool, which give us the final risk that could be derived of this scenario. In this case, as you can see here, after implementing all the information that I have explained, the risk that we have it's low, and the flag that it's rise here is green. Then finally, if we move to the risk assessment tab, we will have a resume of all the different hazard endpoints and all the final results that we are going to extract with the risk assessment after implementing all the information. As you can see, not only is a qualitative information, also we have a quantitative information, and it's based for each specific hazard endpoint. In this case, we only implemented 2, and we have these 2 with each considered a low risk, and that's why the flag that it's right, it's green. So this could be the final outcome that it's giving in the risk assessment tool. So as a resume of this Guide Nano tool and the scenario that we have built, which are the pros and cons that we can extract. The pros that we can extract of this tool is that it's a good performance of the tool, and it's also validated by the OECD. Also, consider also only the dermal, because it's a textile that it's wearing the worker. Then we have the model effects of a wide range of risk mitigation measures. As you could see in some of the tabs, we can implement and we can take into account the different risk mitigations. Here we haven't considered risk mitigations, but we can also see the difference before and after applying a risk mitigation and how it's then affected into the final risk assessment that we can extract with the Guide Nano. And the final pro that we can extract is a quite accurate estimation of emission and risk. As you could see, it's a quantitative number, and it's clear to see if there is a issue to take into account or not. Then the cons that we can see here in the Guide Nano, it's the amount of information that we have to implement. It requires a lot of information, and the information sometimes it's detailed. So maybe the user that is using this tool at first can consider it's a little bit difficult to use it as a first stage, but it's a matter of time, because then it's the information there, it's clear to implement it. And also because there is a lot of information to implement into the tool, the time that requires it's so high. And also the expertise. So this is all from my side. If you, Ruben, want to talk about your take-home messages.
Yeah, sure. Just to finalize this webinar, we want to share with you some take-home messages. So from the part I have explained to all of you, we have to keep in mind that the definition of nanomaterials, which was provided by the European Commission, is a recommendation, but despite of that, we need to try to follow as much as possible this kind of recommendation, as this definition has a wide scope and is broadly applicable. The main part of this definition applies to the particle size as the main criterion. Apart from this definition has been implemented in several EU regulations, such as the Biocidal Products Regulation or the Food and Novel Food Regulation, and so on. So it's implemented with adaptations from the main one. The nanomaterials are explicitly addressed in several EU sector-specific regulations and intense overreach. In order to carry out the risk assessment, there are key physicochemical properties to be considered, and the toxicological and toxicological assays must be performed considering some specificities related to nanoforms.
In the case of the Guide Nano, what we can take home, the take-home message that we can extract is more or less the pros that I mentioned before. First of all, the quantitative exposure concentrations that the user can obtain in both short and long term for the different exposure routes. and also the evaluation of the different risk mitigations and how then they affect on the risk of the scenario that we have built. So this is all from our side. And now if you have any question, we are more than welcome to hear them.
So yes, thank you to both of you. And during your presentation, we have collected just one question. And this, okay, it was about the REACH in general. And the question is, does REACH include advanced materials?
I saw that in the chat, and this is a question
Yes.
from Blanca, who is not here anymore, but as this webinar is recorded, she can check that later on, I guess. So as I mentioned before, the REACH regulation only applied to substances, not to materials. So the advanced materials itself are not covered there, but the substance that conform these advanced materials may be covered. So right now we don't have a clear definition about what advanced materials are. So basically we can agree that it's a broad group, including among others advanced alloys, advanced polymers, biopolymers, porous materials, particulates, novel fibers, composites, metamaterials, and nanomaterials. So, for instance, for nanomaterials are not covered by REACH, but the nanoforms itself is the way to cover them within this regulation. Another example, so as mentioned, advanced polymers and polymers are included in the definition of advanced materials. So polymers are exempted from registration right now, but the monomers that conform these polymers are not exempted. Currently, they are working in an amendment in order to modify the requirements related to polymers as well, in order to include new categories like the low risk polymers and so on. So I don't know what will bring in the future, but currently they are not covered completely within the REACH regulation.
Okay, so maybe I will write shortly this reply by mail to the person who asked this question, as she had to leave. And by my side, I think, okay, so no other questions. So there are no other questions. And if you have time if someone else wants to ask something more, it's the time anyway. We have to say hello to all of you and to. Okay, so yes, no more questions. So let's see in the next ASINA webinar. I think it will be in December. I don't remember exactly. Let me check the next date. But anyway, all of you will get the information about the next meeting for ASINA webinar. So thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Bye.